Good morning. Today I want to talk to you about how Jesus has rescued me from wanting or desiring the praise and approval of others. Now, at first hearing that doesn't sound like a big deal, and wanting to get a little praise and get a pat on the back, good job. There's nothing wrong with that, but I mean to the point of it controlling, ruling your life, and if you don't get it, it becomes destructive. And I want to talk about three instances in my life where you can see this progression of these situations that Jesus used to um, expose my sin, um, deal with that sin, and then actually have an experience where that sin no longer had control or power over me. Because when Jesus starts his work, when he starts to rescue us, that doesn't mean that everything in our heart gets transformed. Our position is transformed. We're no longer destined for hell. We're no longer destined for ultimate death and destruction. We're now destined for eternity with Jesus, and in a sense are already living with eternity with Jesus right now. But that heart work, God changing your heart, that can take time. That's called the process of sanctification, where God starts making you more like Jesus. So let me talk about those three instances. So when I was a kid, I loved sports, was obsessed with sports, but mixed in with these sports, a lot of the reasons I liked doing them was so I could get praise and approval from my family, my friends. It was a way of getting respect from others. And so if I showed some athletic prowess, I was faster than others, or hit the ball well in baseball, people would give me praise, respect, approval, which is what I craved. But here's what would happen is if I struck out in baseball, I made a mistake, missed a ground ball, and I didn't get that praise and approval, or I might even get yelled at or something by a coach or whoever else, it would devastate me. Devastate me to the point that I would become emotionally uncontrollable. I mean, looking back, I feel so bad for all of my coaches. I mean, all the way up even into high school. It's like, how did they deal with me as an athlete? And I mean, again, I'm talking uncontrollably emotional, crying, weeping. And so what I would do is I would actually try to take control. Do you remember in Romans where Paul writes, "O wretched man that I am, who will save me from this body of death?" Well, in those moments, I would in a sense try to save myself. I would correct myself, and I would hit myself or bang my head against the ground. And I did that for a long time. It's just as I get older, even into high school, it just became more secretive. I didn't do it as publicly, and I would try to correct myself, to shame myself. It was almost like self-flagellation, like the way like some monks used to do, and I thought I had the power to save myself, to change my heart, to change these emotions. And of course, over time, I realized that, I mean, I just couldn't. Now, thankfully, at a young age, I came to know Jesus, came to be saved by him through a dear friend. But what happened is over time, I still had these kinds of feelings and desires in my heart. So fast forward into my college years, I played football for a small Division III college, and I came in as a running back, was switched to a receiver, and then finally played cornerback, and then of course I was on special teams as well. But then my junior year, I'd worked really hard in this position. I finally won a starting position, and then first game of the season, I was having a really decent game, and then right before the half. So terrible. We were in this zone coverage. The other team was in the red zone, and we were in this kind of zone coverage. And I dropped into the wrong zone. And I remember the ball just 3 feet or 4 feet over my head, just going over my head and dropping into the hands of this guy who was just wide open in the end zone. Oh my gosh, that was terrible. And of course, which my coaches should have, they set me out and they gave the guy behind me, who's a freshman, a chance to play. And of course, he had a breakout game. I mean, it was almost like the quarterback was just throwing the ball. I mean, and he played great coverage. He ended up getting an interception, ran it back for 30 yards or whatever. Well, anyways, as you can imagine, so I dropped down the pecking order, And so I had to start fighting, and I fought all season to try to win that starting position back. Well, one practice, the head coach comes over to me, and he puts his hand on my shoulder, and I go, "This is my moment. He's gonna call me up. He's gonna tell me to get back in there." And of course, I'm with all the freshmen. I've gotten so low in the pecking order, and he goes, "Patrick, I need to ask you something." And my eyes, I'm like wide-eyed, like, "What is it, coach? What are you gonna tell me? Tell me anything, I'll do it. Like, I just need a chance to get back in there." And he goes, "I left my jacket on the other end of the field. Can you go get it for me?" Now, if you don't play sports, that probably doesn't seem like a big deal. But in my mind, I'm with all these freshmen, the head coach. I have these expectations of what he's going to say, and that was one of the most crushing, defeating things an athlete in my position could hear. And again, think of my desires. I need praise. I need approval. Think of my history of if I didn't get that, if I messed up, how I would punish myself. And this is what happened in that moment. In my heart, I cried out to God. I cried out to God. So I'm going to pause the story. Why did I cry out to God in that moment? Well, it's amazing what God uses to start shaping your heart. So I had this poetry class in 7th grade, and it just opened my eyes to poetry. And I started loving poetry. It was Robert Frost's poem, "Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening." That got me just really interested in poetry. It created this kind of strange feeling inside of me, and I started trying to emulate that by writing my own poems. But then I got into the Psalms, and I started reading the Psalms. And of course, because I was so interested in poetry, I ended up taking poetry in college. And I had some amazing professors in college, English professors, poetry professors. And I loved poetry. And so I started looking for poetry in the Bible. And of course, it led me to the Psalms. And I started noticing the depth at which David and these other psalm writers are writing. And they're crying out to God, just pouring out their emotions and feelings on God. And I suddenly realized, man, like, God can handle this. He can handle whatever I'm feeling inside, whatever I'm thinking. And so I would actually start writing these really crazy poems. But also in my prayer life, if I started feeling or experiencing these things, I would just start yelling out to God, crying out to him. And in this case, I was crying out my heart. But what that did, instead of losing it, because my gut reaction was not crying out to God, I should mention that. My gut reaction is I wanted to take my helmet off and just start swinging. Take all my equipment off, throw it on the ground, kick it across the field, and storm off. But instead, in that moment, I had that gut reaction, but I started crying out to God in my heart, not out loud. I went down, I grabbed his jacket, handed it to him, made it all the way through practice, and I remember being in the locker room just thinking these things over. And I had a dear friend, Greg, who came up to me and said, "Hey, you want to grab dinner with me?" And I said, "No, I'm just going to hang out for a little bit." And Greg I'll do another video about Greg someday. God has used him in a powerful way in my life, And everyone left the locker room. I'm by myself, so I finally start getting undressed, putting things away. And I remember it's night, and I was walking across the football field. And if you've listened to my other videos, you know how powerful nature is and how God used nature to reveal himself to me. But I'm walking across the football field, and it's night, and I'm looking up into the stars. And I know if you don't play sports, this probably doesn't sound like a big deal at all to you, but this was a devastating blow in my life. But my reaction is I didn't turn that punishment inward. I realized in that moment, as I'm walking across the field, I'm looking at the stars, I started thinking about Jesus, and I started thinking about that Jesus took the punishment that I deserved. So I didn't have to punish myself any longer. And it was okay that I was still struggling with these things. And so I took all these emotions that were welling up inside me, and I said, "Lord," and I don't even remember the exact words, but I just started yelling and crying out to him, just unleashing unfiltered, totally raw emotion. And even in a sense, I hated the way I was feeling. I even told God that. And I just remember thinking of Jesus on the cross, taking my punishment, just thinking how good and how beautiful that was. And that calmed my soul. That calmed my spirit. And I remember that might have been one of the first times where I really started recognizing that I don't need the praise and approval of others because I already have it all in Jesus. How God the Father looks at his son Jesus. Think about how God the Father looks at his son Jesus. He loves him. Remember when Jesus was baptized, God says, "This is my my son with whom I am well pleased. I realize that because I'm bound up in Christ, that's exactly how God looks at me. So I have all the praise, all the approval I could ever want in God the Father. And all of that kind of coalesced in my mind and my heart in this experience. So let's fast forward. Now, struggling with those things didn't go away, and it still hasn't gone away, but it's been so squelched. It's nearly gone. But I've had these moments and experiences where I don't get praise and approval, maybe even in a situation where I deserve it, and God is able to calm my heart. I'm able to find my strength, my hope, and my identity in Jesus because I have all the praise and approval I need in him. So I'll share one more story with you. Third one. This is fast forwarding years later. I was training for the U.S. Skeleton Development Team, which many of you have heard about. And I am rocking it out. And I'm a 30-year-old, I'm a 30-year-old man at this time. 29 going on 30. And not that that's old, but for a sprinter, that's starting to get pretty old, which is, skeleton is all about power and speed and then, of course, skill. So I'm working on my speed and I am rocking out my training. I'm maxing out lifts, getting weights I've never done before. I'm getting faster than I've ever been, even faster than when I was in college to a certain distance. And I mean, I'm feeling great. So I'm out at the track and no one's around. And it's this track at a high school. And I'm training. It's hot. No one's around. I had my shirt off. Typically, I would not do that. And I was just feeling really good. And I'm just flying my sprints. Well, this group of high school boys, but they were very large, athletic guys, big group of them walked out on the track. And I kind of heard them and they were laughing. And I was like, I wonder if they're laughing about me. I'm like, that's so silly. So silly at all. And so I'm just, feeling great, doing my sprints. And of course I look over and they're all looking at me and pointing at me. So what do you think starts going on in my head and my heart? Well, I'm someone who wants praise and approval from others. So my gut reaction was, it made me mad. It made me feel bad. And I took a breath. I'm like, Jesus, you're my all. You're my everything. I've got all the praise and approval I need in you because of what you have accomplished for me. So I continue doing my sprints. Before you know it, I'm striding a sprint out, so I'm slowing down. I'm kind of striding out. This kid comes up behind me. He's sprinting, and he's got he had like taken his pants off or something just to his boxers, and he hiked his boxers, and I've got to show you this, all the way up to his chest, and he comes running by me like this with his knees way up high, and he's acting like he is talking in slurred speech. He's acting like his brain is malfunctioning, and he comes up to me and he whispers in my ear and he goes, "It's okay, buddy." I mean, how ridiculous is that? Again, gut reaction. What did I want to do? Well, I want praise and approval from others. I didn't want to beat myself up. I wanted to beat this kid up. But in that moment, again, I remembered my strength and identity. My praise and approval comes from God the Father through Jesus Christ, through the power of the Spirit. And it overwhelmed me in this moment. And I actually he walked over to his group, and I actually calmly walked over to the group, and I just asked him in a very calm, clear voice, and I said, "Why did you do that?" And I'll spare all the details, but we ended up having this amazing conversation about he does everything to win the approval of others. Amazing. We built love, trust, and respect in that moment. And I looked at him. I looked him in the eye, and I said, I used to be just like you. You don't have to live in that bondage anymore. And I said, do you know who rescued me? Who changed who changed me so I don't have to live in bondage to that? The praise and approval of others? And he goes, who? I said, Jesus. I'm like, do you know who Jesus is? And I very briefly explained to him what Jesus had accomplished for him. Now, it ended up, he had heard the gospel message. He did know of Jesus, but I tried help connecting those dots and kind of fitting the gospel to that point where he was at in life. And as I walked away, he said, thank you. Now, in the old Patrick, I could not have done that. But hopefully you see the progression of what Jesus did. Jesus rescued me, and then it was through the power of the Spirit changing my heart, providing these circumstances to expose what was in my heart. And now Jesus has set me free, and I get to live in the freedom of Christ and the power of the Spirit, talking to God my Father. But isn't that amazing how God used those situations, even used poetry to get me to a place where I could cry out to him. So my hope and my prayer for you is, if you're listening to this, that don't lose hope. Maybe there's sin you're still struggling with, or even sin that you want to hide and you don't want to expose to others. And I want to tell you, there is hope and freedom in Christ. Cling to him. Cry out to him. He will rescue you, and he will transform your heart. What the time frame on that transformation is, I can't tell you, but walking through it with Jesus is so good, and I hope that you get to experience that same kind of freedom that I've found in Christ. If you're listening, I love you, and take care. Bye.